So Josh, did you just pass by my car and key it?
I did. I just kind of I was like, Ava, look over there. No, come on, it's a cute little racer. Yeah, I think it's neat. It doesn't. I don't know if it fits. I don't know if it fits 2 car seats and a mom. So I don't know if that's good for a family of 4.
Let me try my hand.
Probably not.
Your house will do that.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh,
It's
you're
a lot of fun.
Baker.
So Janelle has also.
I know. Look at Janelle's nuts.
I know.
Am I missing one?
Or are those?
At least it's not in red.
Okay. But otherwise, I got them all.
Oh, actually, yeah, green is a good one too. It calms people down.
Even as you're striking it.
Even though you're like
Your
round.
neighborhood, you don't have to.
Yeah,
For sure.
exactly.
Not aggressive.
Right.
So we once judged all together, or just for a couple of weeks?
I know. Second time in a row.
Right.
Okay, we'll call to order the September 25 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First item on our agenda is roll call.
Commissioner Glover. Here. Commissioner Teta.
Here.
Commissioner Poland.
Here.
Commissioner Shernick.
Here.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Here.
Commissioner Flagg. Commissioner Honoran.
Okay, next is communications from our planning manager, Don Burchett.
We have none, thank you.
Okay. We next go to our public invited to be heard. If there's anybody in our audience, one person I can identify who would like to come forward and speak about something that is not on tonight's agenda, now's the time to do it. We'll also have a public invited to be heard section after all of our items on the agenda. Nobody's coming forward. We'll close the public invited to be heard. Next is approval of our August 28, 2019 minutes. Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes, Commissioner Poland.
I will second.
Second by Commissioner Poland. All those in favor who were present at the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? If you weren't present, Commissioner Glover and Commissioner Oneron both abstain, so that passes. Next is our Main Street Corridor Plan presentation, PZR 2019-12, with Principal Planner Aaron Fosdick.
Good evening, Commissioner Shernick, members of the commission. If it's okay, Lindsay and I will sit at the table so we can go through our materials, but if you'd rather us be at the podium, we're happy to do that. I'm Aaron Fosdick, and I'm with the Planning and Development Services Department, joined by Lindsay Sousa with AECom, and she's leading the consultant team helping us on the Main Street Corridor Plan. So we provided a lot of information in your packet, some detailed recommendations for each of the character areas and catalyst areas. We're not going to go through all of those in detail, but we do, as this is the kind of last time you'll see us presenting on this project, we do want to provide a recap of what the planning process has been, what those high-level recommendations are, and then we're really excited to talk to you a little bit more about some of the implementation strategies. And so Lindsay will go through a short presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions. We will be seeking a recommendation from the commission tonight, so we're going to be looking for you to provide a recommendation to City Council on whether or not they should accept this plan and what other changes you might recommend they make. So we'll talk about that towards the end. But with that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay to provide an overview of the project.
Great, thank you, Erin, and good evening. I'm happy to be here, and this process really represents a culmination of over a year of work that we've done to study Main Street, all the way from Highway 66 at the north to Plateau Road on the south. So really taking a full assessment of the future of the corridor. So we started with goal setting, and one of the first elements beyond the corridor-wide goal formation was to also specify 4 separate character areas along that 5-mile stretch. Those character areas represent areas with similar characteristics and that may need similar recommendations moving forward. So that was one piece, and those I'll go through further are North Main, Midtown, Downtown, and South Main. We then last fall went through a detailed existing conditions analysis looking at existing and future land use. Much of this pulls from the Envision Longmont plan. We want to be sure to be consistent with the recommendations that came through Envision Longmont, as well as transportation. How's the corridor functioning today in terms of moving all modes of travel? And market assessment. We had a market specialist on board looking at both recent development activity as well as projected potential for new development. That flowed into recommendations both at the corridor level and at the character area level. And now we're at this draft plan phase and have put together, as Aaron mentioned, a detailed implementation table to help prioritize recommended improvements, recognizing that not all of this can be done at the same time when we're talking about a 5-mile stretch of corridor. And so there are pockets along Main that we feel deserve maybe shorter term attention. So I'll walk through the development of recommendations, which we looked at that broader corridor scale, the character area scale, and then within character areas, we identified catalyst sites. Those are those near-term 0 to 5 year out opportunities that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term, in terms of vacant sites that may be easy to assemble, and community sentiment around, hey, we want to see change in these locations. And these catalyst sites, we really were intentional on trying to create concepts and strategies that could be transferable to other sites along the corridor. So corridor land use recommendations, and we have a lot of content in here, and I won't walk through every point. But in general, we want to build off of Envision Longmont and consider additional residential and mixed-use development throughout the corridor. We recognize there's a lot of history along the corridor, particularly along downtown, but also outside of downtown, and we want to preserve that history, embrace that history, diversify and enhance the economic base through infill where appropriate. Transitions to neighborhoods is one that we've heard a lot about through this process in terms of if you consider density along the corridor, have sensitivity as well to surrounding neighborhoods. And don't turn your back in terms of development to those neighborhoods, and also safe east-west connections for residents to enjoy Main and to cross Main. That's been a big point as well. Parks, plazas, green spaces, especially along North Main. As we know, when we get beyond, say, 10th up to Highway 66, there isn't really a there per se, and we need additional parks and plazas and a diversity of green spaces. In terms of corridor transportation recommendations, we put these under the framework of guiding really philosophies of safety, mobility, and connectivity. Especially along North Main again, we need new street connections to create more of a grid network. You have large parcels and disconnected streets, so that's a consideration that we advanced. Additional medians. Medians have been successful through downtown. They serve a number of purposes in terms of helping calm traffic, in terms of access control, in terms of beautification. There's a number of benefits to medians, so we've identified in the plan, particularly in the appendix, the transportation appendix, exactly where medians would be recommended, recognizing they're not recommended necessarily throughout the entire corridor. Mid-block crossings outside of downtown are recommended as part of this plan. Mid-block crossings of Main to allow bicycles and pedestrians to cross safely. Parallel bicycle routes. Main is not necessarily an appropriate north-south bicycle route throughout. There are sections that may be appropriate. So what we've done is looked immediately east and west to identify where those contiguous bicycle and pedestrian routes may be located. That's been a key part of this as well. Alley enhancements and then signal timing as a whole along the corridor. Next slide really goes into a little more detail around bicycle and pedestrian recommendations. And so it outlines that in terms of those north-south routes I just mentioned, where those routes could be. And unfortunately, that isn't really an easy answer. We looked hard at there's some streets that need to kind of navigate. You may have to cross over onto one from the other. There isn't a clear north-south route on either side. So we've studied what may make sense there. Distinguishing and separating off-street bike facilities from pedestrians with use of paint, textured concrete, making sure that bicyclists can cross Main safely with specialized treatments. Also expanding sidewalks along Main to create a continuous walking environment, improved walking environment, and enhancing intersections. So what we've done in the plan is actually developed cross-sections throughout the corridor, because this corridor today is very diverse in terms of roadway width and accommodations for various modes. We've developed existing cross-sections, interim cross-sections, which are really how can we make some shorter-term improvements that fit within the right-of-way, and then what we were calling ultimate at the bottom here, which is over time, what can we really work toward in terms of narrowing lane widths across the board, adding those medians that I mentioned, wider sidewalks, buffers, and then bike lanes in certain areas. So these are the 4 character areas, and I'll walk quickly through the recommendations with those. But these outline the physical boundaries of each of those character areas. So starting with North Main, that's Highway 66 to 17th. Many of these recommendations are similar across the character areas, but they speak to the need to encourage infill, especially where you have large underutilized parking lots, for example. Building heights, maximizing building heights. We can go up to 4 stories and even higher here. Orienting buildings to Main Street, creating a more cohesive and connected street network, as I mentioned, improving the pedestrian and bicycle experience, and adding public spaces. And we also, as I mentioned, the economist on our team explored some different market tools that we could consider as well in terms of urban renewal. In terms of business associations, we really felt North Main could consider that in particular to help catalyze some of these investments. In terms of the more detail around the North Main vision, the gateway signage component at 66 in Main was one that continually came up from the public, that you don't know necessarily that you're entering Main or downtown from Highway 66, and so that's one of our key recommendations here. Establishing an enhanced transit stop at Main and 21st, recognizing that long-term, the Highway 119 bus rapid transit project, if that comes through, that we want to have an enhanced stop at station locations, allowing up to 5 stories, reconfiguring large parking lots, as I mentioned, and installing mid-block crossings. This is an image of the 17th and Main, where you could have a focused mobility hub with a lot of different multimodal activities happening here. So we created a rendering to demonstrate how we really want to move all modes safely down Main and accommodate and make efficient use of space. And then, as I mentioned, those catalyst sites, we focused in on 21st and Main, near the King Supers, the existing King Supers, as a set of parcels that could redevelop over time with what we were calling entertainment-type retail uses along Main, office to the rear, and then added residential when you move farther toward the neighborhoods and have that transition. So these are some renderings that show that catalyst site at 21st and Main. And I think that an entertainment type use in this vicinity could really help create that identity that's lacking today along North Main. So that's an element that we wanted to focus on here. Midtown, as we move farther south, is 17th Avenue to 11th Avenue. Very much similar in terms of recommendations to North Main. What I will note is that there's definitely a cultural a feel with businesses that we want to embrace and maintain. And that was a big piece that we heard through the process and developed recommendations on. For example, encouraging murals and art to showcase the area's history and diversity. This is also the area of the corridor where we have a number of access control challenges. There's a number of access points along Main. Not very efficient for vehicles moving up and down Main, and could actually create more efficient uses of space on parking lots that front Main. So that was a big recommendation that we made through this Midtown stretch. But a number of folks in our recent public meeting a few weeks ago spoke about the need to extend the character of downtown further north into this area. And so that's a theme that we heard in the process. So I've just walked through a number of these detailed recommendations, increased mixed use and residential, work with the cemetery to ensure that bikes and pedestrians can move through to some degree. We're not necessarily encouraging through traffic here, but we're not discouraging it either. That comes back to that need for north-south bike connections that don't exist today. So facilitating multiple methods of mobility. Wider sidewalks through this stretch as well. And then this is the catalyst site that we evaluated from 15th to 17th along Main. So on the far right there is Main Street running north-south. We identified vacant parcels that we could bring in an enhanced residential, multifamily residential. We also heard a strong need for park space, open space, so we studied where that space may be located. And also in this stretch, we studied the continuity of streets and evaluated Terry and 16th as possible north-south and east-west connections that could help traffic move through. And then in the downtown, the heart of Main Street, we want to build upon all of the activities and character that make downtown what it is today. With added infill, with added consideration of parking structures over time that may make sense to accommodate parking need. And that's really the crux of the downtown vision. When we evaluated downtown, we pretty quickly honed in on what I would call the whole of the donut, which is third, extending third down to first. That really quickly became our catalyst site for that area, the 100 and 200 blocks, because there's so much development happening there in terms of South Main Station, in terms of other development projects, and the public expressed a need to really extend the streetscape of downtown, starting at Third, down toward the tracks. So that was a big focus area of ours in terms of mixed use development along the 100 and 200 blocks. We talked about attracting potentially a food hall or other space that could really be a gathering space. Arts were another component that could give this an identity here and create a sense of place. And then extending the streetscape, the medians that you see downtown, and potential mid-block crossings where it makes sense, for example, near the South Main Station. So that was our catalyst site for the downtown area. And also maximizing the slope of the hillside as you come down Third. That's a barrier for folks. But it's also an opportunity in terms of development, future development potential. South Main extends down through Ken Pratt to Pike and Plateau Roads. And this is an area that's seen a lot of recent development activity. And so we wanted to build upon that. And we did take a very detailed look at the transportation. We heard a lot from the community about speed concerns and the need for enforcement through this stretch, slowing traffic, accommodating bike facilities. Part of Maine today has a bike facility along this stretch, so formalizing that, looking at parallel routes. Maximizing open space. You have the St. Vrain, that's an asset. Making sure people can connect to the St. Vrain was a key point. And this has a little bit more detail on some of those, connecting public spaces, improving the multimodal functionality of Maine with landscaping, sidewalks, and then again, consistent with that North Main termini, thinking about some entry signage to let folks know as they come up at Pike Road that we're entering downtown. It's a place to slow down and experience the surrounding sites. So as I mentioned, we've been working on detailed recommendations as well as phasing, short-term, midterm, long-term, to help provide a roadmap for investment. In many ways, and these recommendations are divided into these different categories to make sure we're comprehensive in terms of land use history, market, transportation, public realm. Transportation-wise, there are some safety concerns at various intersections that have been identified between CDOT and the city of Longmont. And so we definitely want to prioritize those locations and also think about how, with those catalyst sites, we help spur development through public investment in those locations as well. Funding and finance recommendations, urban renewal, other tools that may be available at the local, state, and federal levels. And then we've made detailed recommendations on your code to make sure that future development and activity is consistent and it is allowable with the recommendations under this plan. And I'll end with public engagement. We've had large public meetings. We've coordinated with the STEAM process to get the word out. We had a robust process where we went actually door to door to businesses along the corridor to encourage them to come and to tell them about the project. We found, especially at the last public meeting a few weeks ago, I talked to business owners that are right on the corridor and said they appreciated that and heard word about the meeting. So we took a grassroots approach to getting the word out, as well as traditional social media updates and news articles and such. We did do 2 community-wide surveys and had over 700 responses in the first survey, 400 in the second survey, to really test the recommendations we were making and to make sure we were on the right track. So with that, I will hand it over to Erin.
Thanks, Lindsay. So we realize this is a lot of information, 12 months of a planning process condensed into 20 minutes. And we're happy to take your questions and look forward to the discussion. What we'll be asking specifically from the commission tonight is, again, that you're making a recommendation to council. And we will be asking city council to accept this plan via resolution, and that's going to be going to them on October 22nd. And so we've been busy, obviously, collecting input from the community. We've taken this to the Transportation Advisory Board, to the Downtown Development Authority Board, and now to Planning Commission. And so tonight we have 3 resolutions for your consideration. Resolution 2019-12A would be a recommendation that Planning Commission would approve this plan. 12B would be approving the plan with some additional changes or suggestions that the commission might make. And then recommendation 12C would be a recommendation that council not accept this plan. And so with that, we will open it up for questions and discussion. We did give you a copy of the summary of the plan. We think that this is probably the document, the smaller document that most of the community will look to, but certainly we have the full report, and we did provide a link to that. It's available on the website. So that would be the full report plus the appendices that talk about the specific transportation recommendations as well as public outreach. And so you got a link to that in your packet. We're happy to take comments on either, but really we're looking for that recommendation on the full plan. So with that, we'll open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you very much. I'll kick off with a question. I noticed that in the northern 2 sections that there was mention of possible urban renewal. And how did you determine that? And why is that not mentioned, say, for the southernmost section? I think I know why it's not mentioned for the traditional downtown part, but if you could explain more, that'd be great.
Commissioner Shernick, members of the commission, we specifically included that as a potential tool in Midtown and North Main in terms of the feedback that we received from the community, as well as working with our redevelopment manager and other folks on the TAC. I think that that's a pretty viable strategy. Certainly before any tool like that was needed, we would need to conduct a blight study and really think about what that looks like. You're right that in the downtown, the DDA already uses tax increment financing. We already have another urban renewal area that covers the southern portion of downtown. And so those tools kind of already exist in that area, but we do have some recommendations, particularly in the southeast urban renewal area, about thinking about how we might start using that tool. With regard to South Main, I don't think that that's something that's off the table, but it's just not something that popped up in our economic analysis as much as being probably as near term of a need.
Okay.
And part of that might just relate to kind of the age and built environment. As Lindsay mentioned, South Main is an area where we've seen more recent development, so that could be a factor.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, discussion amongst the commission? Commissioner Flagg.
I have some questions. One of the ones, how attached are you with your divisions between the various sections along Main Street? The reason why I bring this up is because there's a shopping center there at the southeast corner on 17th and Main that I would think would be more applicable in terms of redevelopment to the north rather than as part of Midtown. So I wondered about that. And then the mid-block crossings there in North Main, I like the idea of them. I just know that right now, speeding up there is the way of life. And so I sort of wondered, how do you manage to get people more acclimated to the lower speed, because they're going to have to do that if you're going to have mid-block crossings. And in that regard, the ones in Maine, way down in the downtown area, are fine, except that sometimes you can't tell if a pedestrian is waiting to cross or not. So maybe as you look at doing that kind of a feature, that you figure out how to make sure that they're obvious enough so that drivers know. Even when I'm looking, I can't always determine that a pedestrian is or is not going to cross. So being alert isn't enough. Sometimes something else may be needed. One of the other things that I was looking at was the right-of-way. In your diagrams, I know this is an overall plan, and when you get down to the implementation, you will be able to show us or show whomever the actual right-of-way available. And so I felt a little constrained in looking at the plan and trying to visualize it, not knowing how much right-of-way you think you'll be dealing with. And as you get in some parts of the corridor, I'm not sure where the right-of-way is because of the older development, especially in Midtown. Some of those areas are not exactly with public facilities, not still on private property, and it's a mishmash in there. So knowing how much right-of-way that you're really dealing with as you try to put in these different kinds of things I think is really important to do. As we proceed into the downtown area, you talked about calming speeds, and in downtown, it's really not as bad as the need for calming speeds further north and further south. But I didn't see those terms mentioned in the rest of the plan. You show a possible redevelopment around the cheese factory there, which is south of 2nd to 1st and across from the new building that's going on the east side. And what you're showing there is a rather larger parking lot to the northwest of the cheese factory, and then just park area right around the cheese factory. One of the nice things about the cheese factory and the parking where it is now is that it's easily accessible into that building. And so you wouldn't want to change how it all works there when it's working well for them because you think a different parking area would be better. And I realize things change over time as you implement, but I thought we have to not forget that there are going to be people who are going to need to have easy access into businesses that they have been using, because we want to continue to support the businesses and keep people out and about. And I like the attention to detail on the pedestrian access parts and the wider sidewalks. I like that very much. Down in town also, you show the block where the post office now exists to be an area of redevelopment. Do you know something we don't about the post office's future? Just wondered. So then I looked at the development standards as well. And one of the things that caught my eye were the words close distance. And that showed up in quite a few sentences. Things would be close distance measured. What does that mean? I assume at some point we're going to know that it's X number of feet per height and so on, but close distance to me doesn't seem to be a very graspable amount. And then I had a kind of a thought the other day as I looked through the plan and I was looking back over my notes. And one of the things that I started thinking about were pocket parks. So what is the difference between a pocket park area and a setback area that's been enlarged, or regular landscaping for parking areas, or extra tree spacing in a right-of-way, or how do we make a difference between an actual usable plaza area and a pocket park type thing? Is there a criteria that says a pocket park might have to have a size so that a bench could be put in it, or a kid who is small could kick a ball a little bit, or what? Because I'd hate to have development go on and then have somebody come up and say, oh, that area is a quick pocket park, and I want credit for that, when it's really an unusual space on the plot line, on the plat or wherever, that really just needs to be landscaped tastefully and move on, but does not really constitute a pocket park. Because I think we're talking about usable space for people and not, and maybe even a pet walking area, but not just something that they can't figure out what else to do with. So I have one last question. When, I don't know how much you looked at where St. Vrain Creek passes over, or under rather, Main Street. So is there a philosophy ongoing, not only how it connects and how we connect to it as pedestrians or bicyclists or whatever, but I was concerned about a comment that I read from some of your public meetings, and it was concerning development along the creek areas and having retail or some other kind of development. So there was one concern raised about habitat, and the other one raised about retail operations or building up the area rather than leaving it open for people to enjoy as open space. Overall, you've done a lot of work on this. There's a lot of detail in it, and I could read through it easily, which was very nice. Thank you.
Can I do I have to press something? Oh, okay. Thank you, Commissioner Flagg. I appreciate all of your detailed comments. And is it on? Yes. Yeah. Okay. And so I'll work through those. And thank you for taking the time to really work through the plan. And we did go to a number of details on these. And so on the character areas, that was really a guiding framework to help us, as I mentioned, group similar areas. But I absolutely agree with you that they're not intended to be the guiding documentation for recommendations moving forward. 17th in particular, as you mentioned, is an intersection that needs to be looked at as a whole in terms of the solutions for the street, cross streets, as well as development that surrounds it. So we looked at these as an overall way to break up the corridor, but they're very fluid, and the recommendations should be similarly fluid. So that's the whole intent. Mid-blocks, we talked a lot about a mid-block up at North Main, recognizing that there's the speed limit, and then there's folks that go much higher than the speed limit. And so what we envision is that mid-blocks that are closer to downtown would probably be in that shorter term time frame. And then as you have more development activity, little bit higher density uses, building heights, you start to see more activity happening, then I think that that becomes the time where you really say, okay, we have a lot of pedestrian activity happening here. We have large blocks. We already today are seeing that folks cross mid-block, and it's a dangerous condition. But I think as you see more development activity happening up there, that will warrant the need to study a mid-block crossing, and that will need to happen in coordination with CDOT as well. We've had a conversation with them, and those speeds are a factor in this. We want to make sure that pedestrians and bicyclists can cross safely, and there would need to be a specific study conducted to make sure that that crossing would be warranted. So in terms of treatments, there are a variety of treatments that could be thought about in terms of pedestrian scale lighting to alert drivers, signage, added signage, crossing treatments. So there's a number of different strategies to make sure that vehicles are aware that pedestrians are wanting to cross. And then in terms of right-of-way, so we have future cross-sections of Maine that are interim that would fit within right-of-way, and as well as that ultimate, maybe wider cross-section. In terms of right-of-way impact, though, we didn't go to that level on those catalyst sites to say this is how much right-of-way we would need. I think, Erin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important, as we did that analysis, really what we looked at in those interim sections is what could we do curb to curb. And so the right-of-way, especially in North Main and South Main, is much larger than the street itself. And so we did look at what could be done in the existing right-of-way. So even that ultimate cross-section is really thinking about the right-of-way itself, which may include, for example, a 20-foot landscape buffer in addition to an 8-foot detached walk. So you have, almost 30 feet of right-of-way beyond the curb that we felt like we could reprogram. So even those ultimate cross-sections, if I'm not mistaken, fit within the existing right-of-way. We're not recommending changes that would require us to acquire additional right-of-way. You're right that, particularly in Midtown and downtown, obviously, there's less right-of-way. The street section itself may be smaller, and certainly on either side, the right-of-way is smaller. So when you look at those cross-sections, you'll see less change, for example. But the interim and the ultimate recommendations are within the existing right-of-way, even though we didn't do a full design of the entire corridor.
And I think also the intent is to just reallocate space. So if we take travel lanes down from 12 feet to 11 feet, we may get 4 feet back in that process. We can make wider sidewalks from that. So reallocating space is a big priority for the process. Downtown calming speeds, you're right, we really focused more on North Main and South Main, not as much through downtown. And so we can revisit that and evaluate what our traffic modeling showed in terms of speeds and whether it would be warranted to make a recommendation there in terms of traffic calming. In terms of the Cheese Emporium area, that physical space, if we think about the long-term First and Main transit station area, is lacking in green space. And so there's some flexibility there on that broader block in terms of where we'd accommodate parking for, say, the Cheese Emporium and other future uses there. So I agree with you, that needs to be convenient. But we were also trying to add some green space within that block that could connect folks over to First and Main as well. So that was the intent. But we can work with that and make sure that that's flexible over time. In terms of the post office, that was really not necessarily information that we have per se or anything of that nature. It was just, could that be a different use over time was the question we were asking. And Erin, I don't know if you have anything to build on that, but
I think we think it at some point could be a different use. That may not be the optimal site, but we haven't entered into conversations with the post office. That's why it says future. All of this is future, but that's future.
Go ahead.
I think the only thing I would add, Commissioner Flagg, is that we do have definitions for pocket park in our code, and so certainly we would want to avoid what you spoke of, just remnant open spaces being counted as, usable urban plazas or park spaces. And certainly some of the recommendations that we are making for the code would need to address those things. The last thing I think you talked about was kind of the river corridor area. And so certainly there's been a lot of work with the Resilient St. Vrain project and thinking about how that underpass functions, how the trail will function, what the connections to the nature area and to other areas are. And so through our recommendations, we've really been focused on what do the connections to the river and to the amenities along the river look like. In tandem with this project, City Council has been really focused on kind of what they're calling a building steam project, and that's kind of focused on their work plan. So they've been taking a more detailed look at the river corridor and what potential redevelopment could look like. And so kind of figuring out what that balance between development and the riparian corridor and the natural area looks like has been something that we've kind of started to study under the direction of City Council. And so we intentionally didn't spend a ton of time in that area because there was additional work going on, but certainly that's something we want to continue to coordinate with and think about because it is an incredibly important area, and obviously the city's making a lot of investment there, and will continue to be important. So yeah, we'll continue to keep looking at that and how we integrate Main Street with that area.
Making sure that we preserve buffers along the St. Vrain. I think that was a comment we heard, but if there's development outside of those buffers, face that amenity, I think was the overarching theme. But we want to make sure that we don't impact, as you said, those wildlife movements and that sort of thing.
I have another question. Lindsay, you mentioned that there were some traffic studies done, or modeling, I should say, done with this. What did you see happening once traffic speeds are calmed on the south end and on the north end? I would imagine that some traffic, especially like large truck traffic, might start avoiding Main Street because it's slower to get through. What did your models show in terms of what happens long term with, say, like traffic loads on Main Street?
So we didn't. So let me think through this because I didn't lead the traffic engineering component of it, but we didn't. I'd have to evaluate whether truck traffic in particular would start to use parallel corridors. I think that's what the trend that has happened on other similar corridors through downtowns and extending outside of downtowns is trucks do start to use parallel north-south routes that may make more sense. But we found overall that calming speeds it brings an overall benefit in terms of traffic flow. We looked at traffic signals in coordination with the city's traffic engineer in terms of maybe some inefficiencies happening in certain locations and how we can improve that. We also looked, for example, at right turn signage to alert vehicles when pedestrians are crossing, so some safety components. So all of those we were really focused on that safety piece. We didn't necessarily extend kind of outside of this study boundary to look at the larger impact of traffic. But overall, I think, the corridor could absorb more traffic calming in terms of maintaining that flow over time. So.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Poland.
Thank you. I will agree that both on the north and south side, if there was traffic calming starting a little bit sooner, that may be a big help, because I believe if, on the north side, initially it is 45 when you come into the city for a couple blocks before it cuts down to 35, and maybe we immediately did something where it cut down to 35. And I was trying to think of this whole thing in the fact that as a person who wants to use the area, right now you basically have from the St. Vrain to 11th Street set as downtown. That's 11 blocks. That's actually an awful long area. I don't know if you can go much wider than that or longer than that as far as trying to say that this is going to be our main emphasis to try to get people for entertainment and stuff, where you can park one area and just kind of walk the breadth of it. 11 blocks is pretty much the extent of that. I do like the fact that you said on the north side, you are looking at maybe an entertainment area. I do really love that idea. I think there's the areas there you have noted for working on could stand a change, maybe bringing some businesses closer into Maine. And by doing that, maybe that will help calm the traffic area. I don't know how much further north we want to go with that middle section of trees along Main Street. I don't know how much further you can put that, but I do love that area when I come into Maine and knowing that there's that middle aisle of trees, and I think that is a calming area. I think for the most part that along Main Street in that area, I don't think traffic is as big as an issue. I think the biggest issue is the fact that people are confused. Do you allow pedestrians to cross or not? Maybe that can somehow be better emphasized. What are the true rules as far as pedestrians crossing? When are you supposed to stop for pedestrians and when you're not? I think another thing that I've heard this a lot from, I've read this a lot in comments from public, parking in downtown area. And I know that there were some things made for parking as far as the immediate downtown, but I think they were talking about one time, especially across the street from the cemetery on Main, doing the angled parking along that area. If we could maybe do it there and maybe extend that maybe a little bit north to kind of give that its own little character maybe. But I like the idea of trying to think how we can do better parking. I do like what you've done for the bicycle areas. Boy, that would be nice if you can get something through the cemetery to allow bicycles to kind of stay away from Main Street, because that would give Main Street still for the pedestrians, but give bicycle people a better advantageous north and south routes. I like the fact that you've done it on both sides. And I do agree that the fact that there's really not, especially around Main Street, there's not really good north-south route areas right now, and to better emphasize that. And I think that's right now my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Poulin. So I just wanted to point out, you're right in terms of the 11 block stretch being sizable. We have had some comments that concerning potentially long-term more of a circulator shuttle that could help folks move around. And I think that's been a comment brought up through previous planning efforts as well. So that's one option to help folks move more efficiently across these spaces. But I think you'll almost find kind of some sub areas within that downtown stretch. The core of downtown, north of 3rd, this 1st to 3rd area that's really evolving right now, and even down further south will become places within that downtown stretch. And so more mobility amongst folks within those sub areas. And parking downtown has been a comment that we've received over time, and I know the previous parking studies have been done that we evaluated that essentially summarize that parking as a whole is not necessarily a significant, lack of parking is not a significant issue, but we did evaluate that. That's a reason why we have some recommendations for off-street parking and attention to that, as well as structured parking as building heights and new development starts to happen over time. So, thank you.
Commissioner Onaran.
It's a very exciting vision. I just want to interpret the purpose of this vision and the way I'm approaching, just for the sake of thinking. There's so many details in this whole document that it would take hours and weeks for us to really scrutinize and get into each detail. But the way I see this is a vision to encourage the property owners and the future developers to see what is possible in this whole corridor. And in terms of the land use, it's very strong vision. I mean, when I look at the big boxes and large parking lots, immediately I start seeing sprawl happening in the cornfields for residential. Whereas there's so much space in this corridor, and as well as the river corridor, that if we can capture more density in these areas and create more mixed uses, actually we're doing something very sustainable for the future generations. So with that, you're not only saying that, look, this is what's possible, but you're also saying we're going to change the code and we're starting to invest in the infrastructure. We're changing the cross sections, we're implementing certain things. And that's a very strong message. And that's the message I'd like to support. And in terms of, I mean, this is my personal opinion, 11 block, 30 block, there are a lot of long corridors in really successful urban settings. Doesn't mean that you're going to walk all the 30 blocks. It's just that that kind of intensity continues. Denver has some of those, and Colfax, for instance, is really long. Federal is really long, but in certain areas, you're in the middle of nowhere. It's like you're lost because that intensity went away. It's a deserted in the middle of a very urban environment. You have weed growing in the asphalt. So how do we turn that around and make it more compact is what I'm seeing in this document, which is very important. So a couple of other thoughts, in terms of the pocket parks, the way I approach pocket parks is that, you look at a big box area and a large parking behind it. If I'm going to invest and include residential, I need some amenities there for residential to look at, because in the near surrounding, there's nothing to look at. So pocket parks do that. Small parks, they are not really large, but small enough to be very useful for the immediate users, which is the residential and mixed use. So I think the vision is there, and especially in the catalyst projects, I see those like, look, what this is possible. Doesn't mean that it's very well studied and should happen tomorrow, exactly like what you're showing. It's just inspirational for developers to, hey, there are better uses just the one single box. Let's explore those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Thanks, Chairman. It's Lindsay, right?
Yes.
You go. Thank you. Sorry. I think I just want to echo some of the sentiments that the other commissioners have suggested. I mean, obviously, Aaron, you take on kind of maybe what I might call the more tedious projects. Laying out our guiding documents and working on some of these maybe less controversial or less, like really exciting documents that or issues that face our town. But these are so important, and you always do a great job. And so that's easy to see here today. So many of the things, the commitment to infill, the prioritizing of bike and pedestrian routes, nurturing the various flavors along Main Street, I think is so important. This is something that will remain important as our town grows and we fight this small town, big town conundrum we're in right now, and that's great. And this is how we're going to do it. I guess I just had a few questions that were more meant for discussion. On several of the different neighborhoods, or several of the different sections along the Main Street corridor, you talk about encouraging infill. Could you just talk about what does that mean? What are some opportunities that we as a city can offer to encourage infill along that corridor? What are just some, whether we use them or not, what are some options that we could see down the line?
Commissioner Goldberg, I think we really set the stage for that in Envision. And you'll recall when we had, most of you were here during that process, we really talked about, rather than expanding our planning area, we were going to focus our growth in areas of change, primarily in centers and corridors. And so Main Street is really the prime example of a corridor that we think can accommodate some rather significant growth over time, and that will be through infill and redevelopment. I think we're already starting to see a little bit of that in the Main Street corridor. So there have been a few projects, for example, the Chrisman Apartments that were constructed a couple of years ago up on North Main. There's a smaller condo project just south of that that's being constructed. And so obviously South Main Station is a great example of a redevelopment project that took an industrial use and now is adding over 300 residential units. So I think we're already starting to see what that could look like. There's some smaller scale examples of redevelopment, infill and smaller parking lots with maybe restaurants or smaller scale businesses. But I think we will continue to see that. And so you'll see that reflected in our catalyst area concepts, what Commissioner Honoran talked about with the large parking lots that we all see every day that aren't at capacity. I think people are starting to think about there may be a higher and better use, and could I carve off a portion of that, still provide parking for my customers, as well as maybe construct either complementary use or something completely different. So that's what we kind of envision continuing to occur throughout the corridor. And I'm sure we could all identify 5 or 6 areas within the corridor that we think that could happen, and we're seeing interest already in that.
Yeah, thank you. Evidence of it happening is easy to see. I was just wondering, what are the tools that we can implement to encourage infill or discourage, new development elsewhere? Is
Well,
it
I think
waiving
probably-
fees? Is it, mandating various assets within the development? Is it, what are some of the things that we can do to make that more attractive?
I think probably the biggest tool that we would use is our code. Mm-hmm. And with our code update in 2018, we made a lot of changes to the zoning in this corridor. So the whole corridor, as you know, is zoned either mixed-use corridor or mixed-use downtown, whereas previously it was more of a commercial type zoning. And so, allowing residential uses, for example, or mixed uses by right versus maybe being a conditional use, that's an incentive for folks. Thinking about additional building heights, thinking about reduced setbacks, looking at our parking requirements, maybe the changes that we've made to using parking maximums versus minimums. Those are all code changes that we've already made. We've made some additional changes to our open space and landscaping. As we mentioned, there's some additional recommendations in here that certainly council could direct us to look at that we think would help further facilitate the kind of development that we're after here. So that's probably the biggest tool, and I don't know if you have anything additional to add.
No, I think you covered the tools. I just was thinking about, I'm not sure if we mentioned, but we had what we called a developer forum this summer, where we brought 10 plus developers in and walked them through the character areas, walked them through the catalyst sites, and talked about, got their feedback on what would, encourage, what could the city further do to encourage reinvestment in some of these areas, which was, for example, some pretty specific feedback. That arts recommendation that I mentioned down between the 1 and 200 blocks came from some of their feedback in terms of creating a place in that area. So that was really helpful. I think that another benefit of doing a session, a meeting like that, is that we actually educated them about what's to come and how the city already has zoning in place, encourages mixed use along this corridor. So that was a nice benefit to that as well, is raising that awareness.
The other thing that I think has maybe been mentioned is certainly with our public investments in infrastructure and placemaking, those are things that can signal to the private sector that we're ready for this type of development. Certainly there may be some tools, we've talked a little bit about urban renewal and TIF, and that's a tool that's available in some areas now. A fair portion of this corridor is in a designated opportunity zone. That's a tax federal program that could be leveraged. A large majority is in the enterprise zone, which is another federal program that can be used for existing businesses. So there's some other things that, while it's not necessarily the city doing it, it could still provide incentive to create the type of development. But certainly I think some of the infrastructure improvements that we're recommending, and again, some of those are longer term, but those will be things that will potentially spur additional private investment.
Yeah, that's great. I applaud you for bringing in the other stakeholders. I think every time you do that, you get better results. And it's just enjoyable to listen to all of the steps that you're taking to help bring this vision to life. Another thing that recurred throughout the various sections of Main Street was the suggestion for a business association. And I just wonder, we have the LDDA. Is there any reason or is there any potential to extend the downtown district, to extend its boundaries? Do we have an LDDA, a middle DDA, a northern DDA, or like, I'm sure Kimberly McGee, if she was here, would probably punch me, but, what sort of opportunities are there to take an existing business support group and grow it, or just extend it, or give it more muscle?
There's probably a number of ways that could work. Expanding the DDA along the whole length of the corridor probably isn't viable.
Probably.
Kimberly would probably punch us if we suggested that. We certainly do have recommendations in the plan that think about, could you grow, for example, the general improvement district that is in part of the DDA? The DDA has expanded their boundary in the past. They did that when the Roosevelt Park Apartments
Right.
project was going through. So, it is possible to expand that boundary. As we think about it, it may be more of a role that maybe the Chamber or the Longmont Economic Development Partnership or other folks in the business community take on and take a leadership role, and we provide more of that support role. So I don't know that we've necessarily identified what that exact mechanism it
Just
is.
that it might help.
It could be an interested group of property owners. As Commissioner Flegg will attest to, there's some folks, for example, in the Midtown area that already have an interest in kind of that area. Maybe they formalize that relationship, and maybe the city figures out through our economic partnership with those other folks I mentioned how we support that. And there may be some other really great examples out there.
Just to add, my sense is that the North Main businesses aren't necessarily communicating with each other frequently, and so this could be a means by which they start to say, how do we think a little bit more holistically about this broader area? And I think the Chamber has helped engage in some initial conversations with business owners to start that dialogue. So we don't have clear definition yet now about what that could evolve into, but I think there's definitely benefit to them starting to coordinate together.
Yeah, agreed. I think that covers all my questions. Again, I applaud you for your efforts. It's so important. And I look forward to supporting, helping moving this along unless something else comes up.
Thank you. Just for the record, I think Kimberly is kinder and gentler than maybe our comments imply. She doesn't go around punching people. Commissioner Pullen, were you chiming in?
See if there's any more comments.
Okay. Any further comments? Commissioner Pullen.
Well, I will echo the other comments here that I applaud the work that's been done on this. I applaud the outreach to the community. And with all that said, and with prior comments, I move that we approve PZR 2019-12A.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve PZR 2019-12A. Commissioner Flegg. That's seconded by Commissioner Flegg. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, let's take a vote. Commissioner Glover, I show you as not having voted. Okay. So, Jane? Oh, okay, that is an abstention. Okay, all right. Just clarifying as to what that means, because it doesn't say abstain on my little screen here. Okay, all right, got it. So that passes with 6-4, 0 against, 1 abstention. And this item will now be forwarded to the Longmont City Council for action. If you're unfamiliar with council procedures and intend to appear before council, please contact the Planning Division for further information at 303-651-8330. Lindsay, Aaron, thank you so much for all of your work on this. Really appreciate it, and thanks for coming tonight to present this to us.
Thank you for your time.
see. Okay, before we go to our next item, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, we will reconvene after our short break. Thank you for your patience. Next item on our agenda is a public hearing item. It's the 515 15th Avenue preliminary final plat and variances from side and rear yard setbacks, PZR 2019-11, with Principal Planner Ava Paracheski.
Commissioners, so this is the application material. I'm just going to walk you through the background real quick, nuts and bolts, and then we'll have the applicant come up. So this property is at the southeast corner, let me use my cursor, the southeast corner of 15th and Kimbark here. This is the Main Street corridor that you were just discussing, so this would be just east of the Pacific Auction and the Advanced Auto Parts, the car wash, etc. There are two lots. It's developed with a mobile home park, and there's two lots here, as you can see depicted by the red line. But it's one mobile home park. Doesn't have a name, but it's owned by LMC Co-op. There's no sign outside, but it is owned by a co-op. And so the lot in question today is this northern lot, which is 2.1 acres. But the total site between the two lots is about 3.5 acres. And it's zoned residential mixed neighborhood. And so up here at the northwest corner of the property is a single-family house that was kind of built a long time ago in advance, I think, of the mobile home park that was developed in the 60s. And it's all been on one lot. And so that's the situation currently. So the request tonight is to do a subdivision. Again, this is just relates to that northern lot that was 2.1 acres. It's part of the Claremont Edition, Replat A. And they're proposing to plat off a piece of land here where that house is. And that would be a new lot. And the new lot's about 5,000 square feet. And this would typically be an administrative review of a minor subdivision. But because we have existing structures that wouldn't meet setbacks, it's preliminary plat review. So here's some site photos. So this is the existing house, and there's a mobile home next door, and they're 3 feet apart. The new lot line would go right here down the center, and so it would be about 1.5 foot side yard setback. Back here to the south, can't see it in this picture, there's a shed. It's a little bit closer, so that one will be about 1.1 feet from the property line. And in the RMN zone, the required side yard setback's 5 feet. In the back here of the house, which would be along Kimbark Street here, there's a carport that's attached to the house here. And so they're proposing a property line right about here that would be 5 feet from the edge of the carport. And the required setback, the rear setback's 15 feet in the RMN zone. So there are review criteria for a variance. It was gone over in your packet, but there have to be special circumstances, that the variance doesn't create a building or fire code violation or a safety hazard, that we not grant something for a self-imposed hardship, and that it's the least deviation that would afford relief. And so we went over the applicant's submittal. We had trouble justifying some of the review criteria, which was laid out in the staff report. We had a neighborhood meeting prior to the submittal. We had some attendees. According to the minutes, there was no concern raised. We did send notices out when the application was submitted, as well as during the public hearing process, and we have not received any comments from the neighbors. So we're recommending approval of PZ Reso 2019-11C for denial because we had trouble finding that it met the review criteria for the variance. We couldn't find evidence of the undue hardship. We talked about the safety hazard potentially with having a 1.5 foot side yard setback if, for example, you have a fence or you don't have permission from the adjacent property owner. We talked about in the report that the variance, if granted, would trigger the need to remodel the house because you'd have to comply with international residential code because you can't have egress windows within 3 feet of another building. when you have a property line, that is. And, you know, for the least deviation that would afford relief, we suggested to the applicant, if you really want to sell off this lot, we recommend you demo the house, then you don't have this setback variance, and then you can administratively get approval of the subdivision and then sell it off. Conversely, if you, after hearing testimony from the applicant, decide you would like to approve it, we did throw in some ideas for conditions of approval in PZR 11B, and that relates to requiring a cross-access easement between the lots, that we make sure that water and sewer fees get paid for the new lot created for the house. It's going to have its own separate water sewer tap. And that the building code, that the house get brought up to code for a new certificate of occupancy. So Joel Pass is here representing the applicant. And before we get into further discussion, I know Joel's going to be requesting a continuance because they're not fully prepared tonight. But just wanted to remind you, we have sent out notices, and so if you could open the public hearing for anyone who has shown up tonight in response to that notice, that'd be good, before you deliberate on the continuance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joel.
Commissioners, so as Ava mentioned, my name is Joel Pass. I'm with Rocky Ridge Civil Engineering, and we're the civil engineering consultants for the project. And so, yeah, as Ava mentioned, the LMP Cooperative is the ownership group. They're totally new to this process, and they're still figuring their way through it. And they've just recently decided that they want to consult with a planner to help them better prepare to present. And so, for that reason, they'd like to request a continuance.
Thank you, Joel. As Ava mentioned, this has been publicly noticed, and we may have people in the audience who are here to speak tonight. So I'd like to open the public hearing section of this. Invite anybody who's in the audience who'd like to come forward to speak about this issue to do so now. You'll get 5 minutes to speak. Is there anybody who'd like to come forward and speak about this issue at this time? Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. Let's take it back to the commission to discuss continuance. Just to clarify, let me ask a question of our city attorney. When we are requested to continue an item, what are our options? Deny, approve, what else?
We'll try again. Commissioner, if the commission determines that it would like to postpone, I would recommend that someone make a motion to postpone to a date certain. Okay. So that notice is, the notice for the current meeting is continued and provided for the next as well. At that time, I would recommend that you open public invited to be heard again if the commission decides on motion that it wants to postpone to a date certain. The commission may, of course, make a motion not to do that and to continue on with the hearing this evening. And those would seem to be the options in front of you.
Okay. If we were to continue on this evening, and with the client's representative or the applicant's representative having said basically they have no presentation, is that tantamount to basically kind of the same as the client not even being present? Or I keep saying client, the applicant not being present. I mean, they are present, but in effect, they're not because there's no information.
That's right. So this was a properly noticed meeting. The applicant had notice and the opportunity to appear here. And so the commission could determine that the applicant waived its right to be heard. The commission could also determine, or on the other hand, the commission could determine that it would be a more robust process to be able to hear from the applicant.
Okay, all right. Commissioner Poland, thank you.
Joel, about how much longer do you think you are going to need to prepare for this?
Yeah, if I will, I'll have Mike speak. He's the member of the village cooperative.
How's it going? I'm Mike King. I'm the president of LP Co-op. Basically, the reason I'm standing before you today asking for this, it was recommended to us, I believe, to try and get it on your next month's agenda. One, because it probably works better for you guys, and two, because it would give us proper time. The reason that we were postponing and asking to get somebody else, a city planner as well, an outside source, was a recommendation handed down to us just recently. So because we had already advertised for this, we didn't just want to send a letter or send nobody. That's also why I'm here. So we weren't wasting any of your time. That's not what we're trying to do. But through this process being new, I mean, acquiring the park, getting the loans from the park. As a matter of fact, we came to the city of Longmont and was given a $300,000 loan for a 10-year term to get this park. The last piece of what we're doing is trying to sell this house to keep the affordability of the park in check. The whole idea for the park was low-income resident housing. And if you've been watching TV or news lately, people are buying trailer parks up and raising lot rent, forcing them out, building apartments, or just, keeping it high and raking in from people that can barely. Some don't get by. I feel like I do okay, but some of my neighbors, I know that if we were to go higher on our threshold, would have problems. That being aside of what we're asking today, the recommendation came down to us. Everything we've kind of done throughout this process, we've looked at the recommendations from Rocky USA and other affiliates that we've hired, and they've not steered us wrong so far. So we were hoping, because it kind of came on us last minute, they got a glance at our proposal and said it could be much more hard to find a word, but maybe more of a legal sense of purpose for the variance, as opposed to, hey guys, we're just trying to keep the housing low and not end up with a house that sits on the corner that does nothing. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it was recommended to us to ask for this so that we could better prepare with more of the legal verbiage.
Okay, thank you very much. Just my quick 2 cents. I am open to go ahead and extending this to a future date. So does anybody have any other comments? If not,
Okay.
I will go ahead and make a motion.
Oh, wait, no, we do have other
We do?
comments. Yep,
Okay.
Yep. Commissioner Flake. Sure, of course, yeah. We're in full discussion mode here.
Name, Ava. So if, hypothetically, if they were to redraw this one lot that they want to create, and they were to draw it in such a way that the one existing structure still as part of the larger lot is left intact, would that be accomplished by a 5-foot setback? And could then the resulting much smaller lot be built upon?
So, Commissioner Flake, I showed you in the graphic a minute ago, the two buildings are 3 feet apart. So there's no physical way to create a lot line with a 5-foot setback on the east side.
If well, it looks like on the west side, there's a lot. that
Oh, they're
they-
fine on the west side. There's no variance required on the west side. I'm talking about the east side, but you'd have to physically move the house.
Correct.
Or demo the house, which is what
Correct,
we've said.
hypothetically. But if they did that, what I'm looking at is that resulting much smaller lot, does it still qualify as a buildable space for a house? Smaller house, but a house on what's left of that lot, hypothetically.
Hypothetically, I doubt it. I'd have to go pull up a map real quick. But probably not, because they're proposing about 50 feet of lot width. And then, I don't know how wide the house is, but let's say it's 20 feet wide. I don't know how you'd make that work. The minimum lot size is 4,000 square feet in the RMN zone. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the minimum lot width. I'm guessing 40. Yeah, I don't think so. So I don't think that's going to work either. And I think that their intent is to sell the house because they've already listed the property for sale, and it's evidently under contract. So I don't think that moving the lot line and keeping the house in the mobile home park is part of the intent.
But I thought I would ask a hypothetical question just to find out what the buildable
Right. I don't
space
think
would
there's
be
enough
left.
width to move the lot line 5 feet away from the house toward the west either.
Thank you.
Commissioner Goldberg?
Yeah, I just want to echo similar sentiments as Commissioner Poland. I appreciate the applicant showing up today. I respect the need for a little more time to create a more robust discussion. I suspect if they have a little more time, they can come up with the various opportunities or options before them to make this project work or not work. So with that, I guess I would like to propose a motion that we issue a continuance to a continuance on this application to a date certain. And that date being our next meeting next month, if that works for the city.
Which is what?
October 16th.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to continue this item to our next meeting, October 16th, 2019. Commissioner Poland.
I will second that motion.
Seconded by Commissioner Poland. Is there further discussion? Let's take a vote on the motion to continue. Okay, that passes unanimously. So this item will be continued to our next meeting on October 16, 2019. And we will take it up then, and we look forward to seeing the applicant and his representative. So let's move on with the rest of our agenda. Ava, thank you so much for your help presenting this tonight. Okay. Item number 8, which is ballot initiatives presentation by Jim Engstadt and Jeff Friesner.
Oh, that's better. Yeah, we learned something tonight. Good evening, P&Z Commissioners, Commissioner Schernick. My name is Jim Engstadt. I am the Director of Engineering Services with the City of Longmont's Public Works and Natural Resources Department. With me is Jeff Friesner. I will let him spell out his title because I keep forgetting it. This evening, we are here to present a brief presentation, only 170 slides. Just kidding, it's only 16. Regarding the 2019 ballot issues for the November 5th, 2019 election. And we've done this quite a few times, never in front of one of the representatives of the city attorney's office. So if we get out of line, I'm sure she'll yell at us. To start us off, we want to just mention there's a disclaimer. The information provided to you tonight is intended to be a factual summary of the ballot issues of official concern to Longmont voters. It is not intended to urge a vote in favor of or against any of these issues. So that may limit us in terms of some of the questions you may ask. If you want to dig down and get really into detail, we may not be able to answer them, and that will be where Teresa yells at us. Some quick background on those three issues. The three ballot issues for voter consideration. Ballot issue 3B is the competitive pool and ice rink sales tax increase and bond approval. The street fund sales and use tax permanent extension is ballot issue 3C. And then amendment of the city charter to allow for 30-year leases of public property, which is 3D. We will kick this off with the competitive pool and ice. I will turn it over to Mr. Friesner.
Commissioners, Jeff Friesner, Recreation and Golf Manager. Thank you for letting us speak with you tonight. So what the City of Longmont is asking voters is to approve the increase of sales tax and use tax by 0.18%, which would increase the current 3.53% sales tax to 3.71%. That would approve bonding and authority to construct and operate a pool and ice facility, along with some other amenities that I'll talk about in just a second. The majority of the tax, the 0.15%, is needed to construct the facility, and the 0.03% increase would be needed to do ongoing operation of the facility, which would cover the shortfall between the revenue that facility would generate and the actual expenditures. 20 years after the bonds would be sold, the 0.15% of the sales tax increase would sunset. The 0.03% increase would go on because we'd still need to operate the facility. The proposed sales tax would be equivalent to 18 cents on every $100 purchased. What is included in the facility? We are looking at a 10-lane, 50-meter swimming pool that could be have a bulkhead added to it to allow 20 lanes of swimming, 25 yards, which is what the high schools use at this time. Also included would be one NHL-size hockey rink, spectators in both of the spectator areas in both of those, the pool and the ice. We'd also have a leisure pool with zero depth entry water, warmer water, which would be really excellent for swim lesson instruction. And then finally, we'd have a fitness workout area and then also a multi-use classroom. A little bit of history about pool and ice in Longmont. Centennial Pool opened in 1974 and currently serves as the only competitive pool in Longmont. It offers opportunity for meets and practices for the high school swim teams, 2 USA swim teams, which are the Red Tails and Gurgles. Also a master swim program. We also do within recreation a large number of programs, including our own less competitive Kara swim program, and then adaptive swimming, as well as swim lesson programs. The pool is open currently 88 hours a week, and of that 88 hours, the pool is programmed 63 hours. We have attendance of around 200,000 people every year. The Longmont Rec Center really is not set up for competitive swimming, but it is our only indoor leisure facility, and attendance at the rec center is right around 500,000 people every year. Ice, each year Recreation operates a ice pavilion in Roosevelt Park. That ice pavilion operates from November 15th through March 15th. Did I get that right? March to November. November to March. There we go. And the one challenge that we have at that location is really the location itself. It's right next to the neighborhood, and then we have to close every evening by 9 o'clock. And the way the dasher boards are set up, we're not allowed to have any contact leagues at that location. So if you would bear with me just a little bit, this is one of the slides that I like to read exactly and not ad lib, and even more so this evening. So what are people saying about the ballot questions? Those that are in favor believe Longmont's population has more than doubled since the development of the last competitive pool facility 40 years ago. The existing pool can no longer meet the programming and competitive needs of the community. The construction of a new pool with multi-use competitive pool, leisure pool, ice rink, and fitness area can help meet the current demands and future needs of Longmont residents seeking and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. And finally, those that are in favor are saying a new facility would give local access to year-round facilities for ice hockey, ice skating, and instructional ice programs. Those that are opposed are saying construction of this project and payment of debt requires a sales tax increase. The city should find a different way to fund this type of project. The ice rink and competition aspects of this facility serve limited community interest. Longmont needs more facilities that can meet a wider range of recreational needs of its residents. And finally, user fees and charges will not be sufficient to cover the operation and maintenance costs for this facility and will require 0.03% of the sales tax to remain in place indefinitely. So that's all of the slides I have. I can either take questions from you all now, or Jim can go through the rest of the slides, whichever you would prefer.
Let's go ahead and go through all the slides.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So moving on, permanent street fund tax extension. What are voters being asked to do? City of Longmont is asking voters to make permanent the existing 3/4 cent street fund sales and use tax. This tax is the primary funding source for maintenance, operations, safety improvements, and capital construction of Longmont's streets and transportation system. What does this cost residents? The existing tax is in place. It is 3/4 cent on a $1 purchase, and it is an existing tax. Approval of the measure would not change the amount of sales tax currently paid on purchases in Longmont. Some quick background on the history of the tax. It was initially approved by voters in 1986. It has had a series of 5-year increments and approvals up until 2014 election, when we extended it and approved it for 10 years. To go into effect in 2016, so it does sunset in 2026. The uses of the street fund tax. Dollars raised through the street fund pay for a variety of the ongoing maintenance and expansion of the city's transportation system. Items such as pothole repair, snow removal, street sweeping. The asset management component of our streets is primarily the pavement resurfacing. That does include, as part of that, we do include repairs to broken curbs and repairs to sidewalks. Some of the other items also for capacity, roadway widening, or intersection upgrades. We also have safety improvements, new traffic signals, new signing, and our school crossing flashers that the city does own and maintain. Multimodal improvements, bike lanes, expansion of our roads for those multimodal components, underpasses under some of the major roadways, as well as the sidewalk, expansion of our sidewalk system and sidewalk connections. Dollars generated from the street fund tax are routinely used by the city to meet local match requirements when we are trying to leverage our dollars with state or federal grants. Some of those improvements recently were the South Pratt Parkway Bridge and Main Street repaving. Some of the arguments for and against. Those in favor believe that a permanent street fund sales tax authorization allows Longmont to better plan and finance large or long-term projects and provide local funding for grant applications. A permanent street fund sales tax authorization continues cross-sharing among all who make purchases in Longmont and benefit from the transportation system, not just residents and property owners. The renewal and maintenance of the transportation system and a stable funding stream is critical to Longmont's future. Those opposed believe making the street fund sales tax authorization permanent would take away the city's incentive for accountability and transparency to our residents. The city should reprioritize services to allocate the necessary funding dollars to pay for projects and ongoing maintenance and operational needs. The street fund sales tax authorization should not be made permanent, as it is possible that more money will be collected than is needed if transportation becomes a lower priority in Longmont. The last ballot item is amending the city charter to allow for 30-year property leases. What are voters being asked to do? City of Longmont is asking voters to change the city charter to allow for the lease of city property for up to 30 years. Today, the charter, as it exists today, stipulates that the city cannot lease property for more than 20 years. What does this cost residents? There's no cost to residents for this change. Some of the arguments for and against. Those in favor believe extending lease lengths to 30 years allows for additional public-private partnerships, as private partners are more likely to secure a 30-year loan. Private development of facilities like a higher education campus or convention or performing arts center is more attractive and less risky with longer leasing terms. 30-year leases give the city greater flexibility to manage development of land and facilities. And the charter is outdated, as many commercial leases run 30 years. Those opposed believe the city should not enter into additional public-private partnerships. There is no need for agreements longer than 20 years on public land, as extensions of these leases should require examination of current market rates in order to maximize revenue to the city. We do not need additional development in Longmont. And finally, residents should not change the charter, which is the master document for city governance. And in closing, we want to add there's more information at longmontcolorado.gov/election. And in this election, residents can also vote for the mayor, 3 city council seats, and the retention of a municipal judge. And with that, we are here to answer any questions.
Okay, before we ask any questions, I just want to clarify with our city attorney, since we serve as commissioners, and given our role, I want to be careful as to what kind of questions I might ask so that I do not necessarily look as though I'm trying to sway anybody on the commission or anybody in the public according to how they should vote. Am I being overly cautious, or should I continue with that caution?
Chair Shurnak, I appreciate the question. The city is permitted to answer any factual questions that are asked, and so certainly to the extent that the commission would like to inquire about facts, it is free to do so.
Okay. I actually have a couple questions. Very often we get projects in front of us where we hear from the public that they would like to see more parks. They'd like to see parks that are planned for the future to be funded and to actually be built faster than they currently are. So with the proposal for the pool and ice rink, does that proposal slow down the funding of other development of parks in parts of the city? So I am thinking, Don, you can help me out here. There is a project over in the southwest corner with a school nearby it, and we, I think we actually like swapped some land, and a park was supposed to be built, and I think the estimation was that it was going to be 25 years before it was built. So I'm wondering, does this ballot issue push that park even further out? Because 25 years or whatever it was is a pretty long time to ask people to wait.
Commissioners, so I think you're probably referring to the park recreation and trails master plan. It's identified different parks that would be built. It also identifies the next recreation facility that would be out there also. I guess this is just my opinion. I really don't have any say over some things, but with it being new money, I certainly think that it could have a potential, way of taking money for this so that you can't pay for that. So, again, it would be new money. This is what council has directed us to review and present to the voters based on their priorities and I believe what is in the Park, Rec, and Trails Master Plan.
Okay. Another question, and maybe it's too soon for the details, but if you're building a ice rink and a pool, there's a lot of opportunities to save a lot of energy if you build them in certain ways. For example, at CU Boulder, they have run the refrigeration loop, which is actually pulling heat off of the ice to keep the ice cold, and they've run it through their swimming pool to heat the pool. And that also helped them achieve, I think, a LEED Platinum or at least a LEED Gold standard for that project. Is that something that the city would pursue if the rink and pool were approved?
It is certainly something that would be looked at. It's way premature at this point in time. Okay. Everything's conceptual.
Does the city have standards such as everything that's built new for the city meets LEED Gold at minimum, say?
No, we don't.
No? Okay. All right. And then another question. This is about the street fund. Thank you. Another request, very common request that we get is for traffic calming. And just about any project that involves more housing, people are saying it's too much traffic. Can you calm the traffic? And so obviously there's a budget for, especially popular are like the radar signs that would slow people down. But we've been informed multiple times that those are very expensive. So might be one of the less likely traffic calming devices to be installed, depending on the traffic counts and whether it's warranted. Would the street fund, with the ballot issue that's in front of us, would that make more traffic calming devices and the funding of traffic calming more possible?
Extending we're not looking at raising the tax rate. Extending the permanence or making the tax permanence, I don't believe would have an impact on the ability to, within that fund, to change or add, move it around. Where I would direct you would be a direction of City Council during our budget process.
Okay.
But I think that Public Works staff and the traffic group have a pretty strong handle on what we're doing and when we can afford it. I wouldn't say they're expensive per se, but
I got the impression
we,
that
we,
they were.
we try to program them in where they are needed most. So, and there's a number of traffic calming measures that we have in our arsenal or our toolbox that we use. So, but the extension of the tax would not have an impact on the number of items that we maybe would install for traffic calming.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Flegg?
Can we look at the last proposal on the screen? Can you roll it back to look at that so I can phrase my question the way I need to? Okay. This one? Yes. Can you provide us with examples of leased property by the city at the 20-year amount?
I really honestly don't have that information at my fingertips. I would have to consult with the city manager's office and bring that back to you, which we can certainly do. Oh, wait, Don may have an answer for that.
The airport hangars are typically a 20-year lease.
Thank you, Don. Commissioner Goldberg?
Hey, Jeff and Jim, thanks for presenting to us today. I don't know if I've ever sat in this meeting before where they presented the upcoming ballot issues. So I appreciate that. Jeff, can you speak to norms in other towns or other municipalities as it relates to pools, ice arenas? You know, given our current population of somewhere between 90 and 100,000 folks, how many pools do other towns, let's say other desirable cities and towns, have versus what we have? Any sort of context about how we might compare to neighboring municipalities?
I believe the best comparison usually set by the National Recreation and Parks Association is generally one recreation center for every 30,000 people. With a population of over 90, we certainly would need more than one of the full-size facilities. I think that it is one of the goals of communities is not to rebuild the same rec center, and certainly always look to be able to address other needs that have been identified in the community.
Can you highlight other towns in the Front Range that have an ice skating rink? I guess maybe the more important question is, who would we be serving?
So the feasibility study identifies that our service area for this facility would basically be from Loveland to Superior, Lyons to Frederick Firestone area. Would service about 275,000 people. There is no ice rink in that location or that area that I just described. Generally, the feasibility study says that this area can support one sheet of ice, that if another community would build such a facility, that Longmont should not move forward with that if we didn't have it already built. Did that answer your question?
Sure, yeah. Is there open communication between the municipalities about who might be tracking for a sheet of ice?
Yeah, the last one that was proposed in our area was Carbon Valley. They had it on the ballot in 2016. The city actually put the study on hold at that point in time to see the results, and then based on the results of that election, we moved forward.
Okay. Based on your calculations and the need for the tax, it suggests that whatever fees we would charge for usage of the facility would not be able to cover the entire project. maybe the question is, why not just charge more?
Well, again, this is just
Sure.
opinion based on my time with the city of Longmont. I think that we, over the last 2 years, have raised fees within recreation 2 years in a row. And in the 17 years that the rec center has been open, I would say that it's probably one of the first times that we've actually seen it level off and even decline. And believe that we have kind of hit the right spot now of where our fees are set. We also look closely with what other communities are charging because people are willing to travel. And for us to have a busy facility like we have at the Longmont Rec Center, we believe that the fees are right.
Okay, thanks for your time.
Yep.
I actually have a follow-up question about the rink and the fees. I believe in Boulder, the mountain parks in Boulder charge a different fee for use if your license plates are not from Boulder County. So basically, maybe it's Boulder County Parks or something like that. But it's based on where you're from. Would we be doing something similar? Because you mentioned a pretty broad geographic location for use of an ice rink that is being funded by a Longmont tax on Longmont residents. Why not collect more from non-residents?
So currently, we do have a non-resident rate that we charge for all of our entry fees as well as our programs, and that's currently based at 25% extra that non-residents have to pay. I would assume that we would continue that philosophy in the future based on it being a part of the financial policy set by council.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Goldberg.
One more, Jeff. Thank you for laying out kind of how many facilities might be appropriate for the population. Can you speak to trends in usage of these facilities? Perhaps maybe compared to golf. Are we seeing trends in using pools and ice arenas growing and becoming more and more utilized by schools and in the residents, or is this a dying breed?
So I'll talk about golf too if you want, which we've had 2 really good years. I believe and I'm going solely by our experience at the Longmont Rec Center, it is probably one of the busiest in our area. When we first built the rec center, we had a concern, what if we build it and nobody comes? And that really hasn't been our experience. I believe that people are continuing to look at ways to work out. I certainly see no decline in the area of swimming. That would say that, again, the Longmont Rec Center is going down because of that. I think the biggest issue that we have with attendance at the rec center is that people believe that it's too busy and too crowded.
Commissioner Unruh.
I appreciate the presentation. This is a question more to Don, I guess. I'm a little bit confused about our role as commission here. Or maybe I can put it this way. What did I do to deserve this presentation different than any Longmont citizen who's going to vote? Because, I get more information from you guys, but
Right.
What's the purpose?
So I guess I will try to respond to that. I think this is a first-time thing. I think that I was a part of a ballot question last year that involved golf. We did not go to any of the advisory boards or commissions. I think this was another way for us to provide information. If you want us to come in the future, we're more than happy to do that. And we understand you're all busy, and if you don't need this information or there's no time for it, we certainly would understand that also.
I'll just chime in and point out that we are televised, and then of course our meetings are documented and available for viewing pleasure later. So it's very possible that the public some public will benefit from this. So it's not just us. I have a couple more questions. I assume that an ice rink and swimming pool combined takes up a fair amount of space and a fair amount of parking. On this commission, we keep seeing more and more applications coming through for fairly large housing projects, et cetera. Green space in Longmont, I don't know, Dawn could give us the percentages, how much green space is left. But eventually we're building out. Do you have already some sites identified as to where this might be located?
Yes, there are 4 proposed locations, all on city property. The first location is at the Quail campus. It would be north of the new tennis courts. The second location is out at Dry Creek Park, which is Grandview Meadows and Clover Basin, where the large hill is. The third location would be at Clark Centennial Park. If you're familiar with the park where the track is located on the west side of the park, that would be where it could possibly be located. And then the fourth location is on Montgomery Farms property, which is located at Highway 66 and County Line Road. If you drive out there now, there is a sign out there that's a future community park in Longmont, which this could be considered to be there also.
Okay. And also in your presentation, you mentioned that the rec center sees 500,000 users per year, not per month.
Is that what I said?
No. I almost said per month. How many of those users are using the pool, or was that just for the pool?
No, that's overall use. I would estimate that 60% of those users are using the swimming pool. We've been really surprised that a lot of people go to the workout area or to the classes and use the pool after that to continue their workout or to use the hot tub.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, Jeff, I just hope they take a shower between jumping into their workout and jumping into the hot tub or pool. Just to clarify, the new facility would have a pool and ice rink, but also additional fitness services, gym equipment and things like that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Are you familiar enough with Envision Longmont to speak to what a facility like this would do to serve our interest or to serve our goals with Envision Longmont?
No, not offhand. I'm not.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from the commission? No? Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate you answering our questions.
Thank you for your time.
Yep. Okay, next on our agenda, final call, public invited to be heard. If there's anybody in the public who would like to come forward and speak about an item that was not on tonight's agenda, please do so now. Seeing no one, we will close the final call for public invited to be heard. Any items from the commission? Our council representative is not here. Any items from planning manager Don Burchett?
Just a couple things. Excuse me. Based on the continuation of one of the items tonight, we may need to have 2 meetings in October, and Jane's saying no. So I'll need to talk to her. In October, we have 5 Wednesdays, and so it's possible that we may, because of the number of projects we've got that are really close to going, we may need to look at that, because otherwise I think November might get a little crazy, and I don't know how that's going to work with Thanksgiving. So be on the lookout for an email checking in with your availability. Just a point to note, we're getting ready to start our second planning academy with the residents of the city of Longmont. That will kick off here in October. This is our second group that'll go through. This is actually our 3rd time teaching kind of the class. We did one last year for residents that showed interest in learning more about planning in the city of Longmont. That went really well. We did one for our actual employees in here that work for the city, so people could learn a little bit more about what we do as a work group and our involvement in a lot of the things that affect them in their departments. But again, that second academy is going to kick off here in October, so you might see some stuff on there. I think we're going to have someone from the Longmont Observer is going to be attending, taking the class, so they might write some stuff up. So you might see something in the paper. And then the last thing that I saw was that it sounds like the clerk's office will be sending out an end-of-year recruitment email for boards and commissions. And I'm pretty sure that anyone who's on one currently, that's term, I think that's how they do it, if your term is close to being up, that they'll ask you if you're interested in reapplying. So if you are, and we hope everyone is, look for that and make sure you turn your stuff in time so that you can come to any interviews and things like that. So that, I think, is all that I have. So thank you.
Okay, with that, unless anybody's opposed, we're adjourned. Thank you.